My name is Jessica, and I'm an educator at the Perot Museum of Nature and Science in downtown Dallas. In just a minute, you're going to meet my friend Kristen, who's going to be talking to us about some really cool animal adaptations today. But we're going to be having a conversation, so we want everyone listening to be able to answer all of our questions. So Kristen might ask you something like, what do you notice or observe about a certain animal? Or maybe what does that animal eat? Or how it protects itself. So if you or your teacher has access to the YouTube chat, we would love to see your answers. I'll be checking them. But if not, that's okay. You can record your answers in a science notebook or just say them out loud to yourself or maybe to someone else who's in the room with you. But we really want everyone to think about all of the questions. I've really enjoyed so far seeing all of your comments on the first question we asked is in text about which is your favorite animal. I'm pretty happy because it looks like we have a lot of owl fans, which is my favorite. I see a couple of frogs too, which is actually Kristen's favorite. So I think it'll be a pretty fun day to discuss all these really cool animals. And with that, I'm going to send it over to Kristen to get us started.
Hi, everyone. I am super excited today. I love animals, and we're going to talk about their adaptations and how those adaptations help them to survive within their habitat. So my first question to you all is, what does an animal need to survive? Can you name something? You might be thinking food, water, shelter, air to breathe, sunlight, and all of those are great answers. And animals are able to find all of those things within their habitat or their homes. These adaptations are either physical structures on their bodies or behaviors, actions, or something that an animal does that helps them to survive or find food. So I guess we'll start with Ms. Jessica's and everyone's favorite. I think owl won the first round. So I'm going to get our first taxidermy specimen set up. And what I want you to do is look at the owl. This is a great horned owl. And I want you to think about where the owl lives. What does it eat? Can you notice any adaptations on the body that might help it to eat? Or how does the owl protect himself? And I'll give you a minute to do that, and I'll turn him around in just a second. Just from the first question, I noticed a lot of things that you already know about owls, like they hunt at night and they have great night vision. They have different colors, so depending on what species of owl you're looking at, they have different colors of feathers. Those are all really great observations too. So let's see. You may have noticed the large eyes or these feathers up here. You may think that's where the ears are located, but we'll talk about that later. You may have noticed the talons or the sharp little claws down here. And let me turn him around. We can look at the back too. I really like the color of the feathers here. So let's look at some of these physical or structural adaptations and how they help the owl to survive. So owls do hunt at night, and that means that they're awake at night and asleep during the day, which means they're nocturnal. They're able to see at night, one, because they have these really large eyes that they're so large, they allow as much light in as possible, but they're also actually bell-shaped. So the back of their eye has a lot of surface area for photoreceptors, and that will help them to see as well. But they have, and this eyesight actually helps them to hunt. But they have another sense that helps them to hunt too, and that's their hearing. And as I said, they have these tufts of feathers. That's why this is the great horned owl, because of these little tufts of feathers, but their ears aren't actually located back there. They have asymmetrical ears. So one ear is higher than the other. Can you think of how this would be beneficial for hunting? Well, this allows the owls to kind of have like surround sound. So one ear will be able to hear up and around, and one ear will hear down and around. When an owl hunts, they like to sneak up on their prey. So they're actually going to sit in the trees and they're going to look with their great eyesight and they're going to listen. And that surround sound really helps for an owl to pinpoint their prey. We didn't talk about what an owl eats yet. Do you think that they're an omnivore, carnivore, or herbivore? They are carnivores. So they need their eyesight and that hearing to pinpoint their prey because their prey is moving along the forest floor. Things like chipmunks, squirrels. They don't have a very good sense of smell, so sometimes they even like skunk. So that hearing and eyesight really combines to help them hunt at night. The other thing that helps them hunt is their feathers and their ability to fly. As I said, they like to sneak up on their prey. So their feathers, we can look at one, actually help them to be silent flyers. They're serrated, so they're really quiet whenever they fly. And then one thing I noticed about the owl was their feet. We can look at their track right here. They have 3 digits that point forward and 1 digit that points back. Now, if we're looking at this for a hunting purpose, I think that would be really great for whenever they swoop down to catch their prey and they grab it with their talons, and then they can fly away back up into the trees where they feel safe, and then they'll eat it. So I think those 3 digits pointing forward and 1 pointing back will help them grab their prey really quickly. But it's also good for being stable up in the trees where they feel safe. That's going to help them hold on to the branches. And if I switch views really quick, we can kind of zoom in on their feet. You can see how it's holding on to the branch. It has 3 forward and 1 back. It's going to help it stabilize itself in the trees. Another thing I noticed was the color of the feathers. And someone mentioned this in the chat earlier about something other than an owl. And they're right. The owls do it too, though. They blend in with their surroundings. Do you remember what that word is called when you blend in with your surroundings? Camouflage. Owls use the color of their feathers to camouflage in with the tree branches. Why would they need to camouflage? Owls protect themselves with their camouflage. So when they're asleep during the day, other animals are awake and moving around the forest. And so what the owl does is they try to camouflage themselves so that they're protected when they're sleeping. They might also fly away if they need to, since they have the ability to fly. And that's another way they can protect themselves. Let's see, I think I also saw someone mention that owls can turn their necks all the way around, or that they can turn their heads all the way, and they can't quite turn it all the way around. It's not a full circle of movement, but they can actually turn it pretty far. So they can turn it 270 degrees. So if this is our owl and they're facing forward, they can turn it around just like that. And it ends up working out to about 3/4 of a circle. Okay, so they're missing a little bit of area at the back of their head, but not much. Now they have adaptations within their body that we can't see, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you about. So humans, we have 7 bones in our neck and our vertebrae, 7. owls can have up to 14, almost twice as many as humans can. And they actually have extra blood vessels inside their bodies too, so that blood is constantly supplied to their brain, which I think is really cool. Miss Jessica, did I get all of the comments about owls?
I believe you did, and we had some really great ones. I was very impressed with everyone's observations and their answers. Can't wait to see what you observe about the next creature.
Okay, so the next, I think, what was the second most in our first question? The frog?
I think the frog is what I saw second most.
Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing for the frog. I'm going to set them out here, and I'll get the camera adjusted. What I want you to do is make some observations. And I have a bullfrog here, and I have a Woodhouse's toad here. So I have a frog and a toad. And I'll give you a minute. So remember, think about where the frog or the toad live, how they protect themselves, what they're eating, and how those observations, those adaptations that you're observing, help them to find those things. Miss Jessica was right. I love frogs. And I think you're gonna hear me say that I love all these animals because I do. And it's really hard to pick a favorite because they're all so cute. But I do really love frogs. So I'm excited to talk about them. This is an American bullfrog, and this is the largest true frog in North America. They can weigh up to a pound, a little over a pound, and be 18 inches long. So it's pretty big. And then we have a Woodhouse's toad right over here. And we'll compare frog and toad because I think a lot of people have questions about what's the difference between a frog and a toad. So I always like to bring one of each out. So let's focus on the frog first. You may have seen the color and how it may camouflage or blend in with its surroundings. You may have noticed webbed feet, or you may know that it eats insects and that it hops away. So let's talk about them. One of my favorite things about frogs to talk about is how they eat. So do you think frogs are omnivores, carnivores, or herbivores? And we can go through what each one of those mean. So omnivores are plant and meat eaters, so they eat both. Carnivores are only meat eaters, and herbivores are only plant eaters. What do you think about frogs? They are carnivores, and more specifically, they are insectivores. So frogs eat insects. Now, can you think of an adaptation the frog has to help them catch insects? You can't see it on my taxidermy specimen, but they actually have a really long, sticky tongue that will help them catch those insects. So they extend their tongue, it gets stuck, the fly gets stuck to it, and then it goes back into their mouths. Another thing that you can't see here, because I don't have a live specimen, is something else that frogs and toads will sometimes do. And they use their eyeballs to help them eat. And what they do is they use their eyelids and kind of close their eyes and push their eyes down into their bodies, into their mouths, and it pushes the food down their throats. which I think is super creepy and cool, and I love it. So they use their eyeballs to help them swallow. And if you ever watch a video online, I know there's one on the Perot Museum website that talks about frogs and all of their adaptations, and you can see a toad, one of our Gulf Coast toads or Woodhouse's toads, using their eyes to help them swallow. So it's really cool. Now, frogs have to live really close to a water source. So they have this shiny, smooth, and moist skin. And they do have nostrils and they'll breathe through their lungs, but they also use their skin to exchange gas with the air around them. And that's why they need to be coated in water. And so they'll live really close to a water source. They're amphibians. So they spend part of their life in the water and part of their life out of water, but most likely for bullfrogs, you're gonna find them really close to the water source, if not in the water. And that's where this brownish, greenish tint that it has comes in very nicely, because they're gonna camouflage with that ground and the water around them. The webbed feet that they have are also going to help keep them from sinking into that mud. And then how do you think a frog can protect itself? We already mentioned camouflage, but there's something else that they do to protect themselves. They hop away. Yeah, they use these really long, muscular legs to jump away from a potential predator or threat. So if we look at the skeleton of a bullfrog, we can see those really long legs back there. And that's what accounts for most of the length. So I said frogs can get up to like 18 inches long. Most of the length is going to come from their legs, which is super cool. If we look at a toad, their legs are actually much shorter than a frog's. So they're not going to be able to jump nearly as far away as a frog could. They have other ways to protect themselves, though. Let's see. Our toad is also going to camouflage. And actually, let me bring him back over here. You can see him better. So here's our toad. His legs are much shorter, and he may not be able to hop away as quickly, or as his jumps aren't going to be nearly as long either. So his legs are more for like crawling and walking, but he still has webbed feet to keep him above the surface of the mud, keep him from sinking in there. And he still will swallow food with his eyes and camouflage with his surroundings. One thing you may have noticed about this toad is that it has bumpy skin, which is really different from our frog, because our frog had that nice smooth skin. And so that's one difference between a frog and a toad, is that most frogs have smooth, moist skin. Most toads have bumpy skin, and it's a little drier. So toads can be a little bit farther from the water source, but they're still amphibians. So they're still going to spend part of their life in water and part of their life out of water. Since they can't jump away quite as efficiently as a frog can, what they have is another adaptation. And they actually secrete poison from these glands right back here behind their eyes. And so that will, their hope is that the poison tastes really bitter, and if something picks it up in their mouth, they'll just drop it once they get a taste of that poison. They do have another way of protecting themselves too, and they actually might urinate as well. So if they get picked up in an animal's mouth, they might get scared and start secreting that poison from those glands, but they also might urinate in that animal's mouth, hoping that the animal will think that's pretty gross and drop it immediately, and they can, crawl away for safety. So frogs and toads, I said they spend part of their life in water and part of their life out of water. They go through a life changes where their body looks different at different stages of life, and that's called metamorphosis. And not all frogs will go through all the stages, but what it kind of looks like is they start as eggs, and then they move into tadpoles. They have gills and they're herbivores. They live strictly in the water. And then they become froglets or toadlets, where they still kind of have the body of a fish, kind of, but they're growing their back long legs and have a tail for swimming. And then eventually they become a frog or a toad. I think I've said a lot about frogs, and I'm really sorry. They're my favorite, so I think I went a little overboard with our frog facts, but I think that's okay. Did I have any questions come up, Miss Jessica?
No, and don't apologize. The frog is fascinating, and I loved hearing all those facts. But if there are any questions from the owl or the frog or any of the creatures we get to next, you can put those in the chat too, and I'll try to keep my eye on those. But I think that we've gone over all of the frog comments we have so far.
Okay, awesome. And Miss Jessica is right. If there are any questions, we'll just come back to them at the end. So keep putting them in the chat if you have them. I'm gonna do the possum next. So we have the same question. What do you observe about the possum? Where do you think it lives? What does it eat? How does it locate its food? How does it protect itself in its habitat? I know that Miss Jessica and I think possums are so cute. And part of that is this cute little nose that you may have noticed. You may have noticed its feet and claws. Before I turned it, you may have noticed the tail that it has, or the fact that it's furry. Those are just some of the things I noticed. So let's start with what a possum eats. Do you think that possums are omnivores, they eat both plants and meat, carnivores, only meat, or herbivores, only plants? They actually eat everything. So they are omnivores. They might eat things like little frogs and amphibians, insects, berries, nuts, seeds. In our urban area, they do eat people's trash if you leave it out overnight. So they can get into a lot of things. I do see these in my neighborhood from time to time. My dog seems to find them outside when they're climbing along our fences and stuff. So possums do live in our area. They do live in the city as well. And part of the reason why they have done so well here in our environment or in the cities is that they are nocturnal. So they're awake at night whenever we're all asleep. And so that's part of the reason why they've done really well. Now, let's think about it. How do you think a possum might protect itself? It's really furry and cute. Do you think that it would camouflage really well? I mean, it might, but this fur is really going to be to keep it warm. See how thick and long it is. But what do you think about the colors? I don't know if they would win. I don't know if they would win any awards for camouflaging with their environment, but it might work in a pinch if they needed to. They actually do something else in order to protect themselves. So all of the adaptations that we've discussed about the possum so far are structural or physical adaptations, things about their body. But the possum has a behavioral adaptation in action. It's something that it does to protect itself. And you may have heard of it. It's called playing possum. They actually pretend that they're dead in hopes that the threat or predator will no longer be interested in it and it can go along on its way after the threat has passed. So what happens is it's an involuntary reaction. Whenever they feel threatened, they cannot control this reaction. It just automatically happens, and their heart rate slows down and their breathing slows down. And then again, that hope is that the threat, if it's a predator, will think that this animal has died and will no longer be interested in it and will move along to the next animal that it sees. When the threat is passed, then they can get back up and move along and go about whatever task they were doing. But as I said, their body, they can't control it. It's just involuntary. It's something that immediately happens. Whenever my dog has found a possum, they do something else. I haven't had one play dead or fall into my yard or anything like that. So my dog, they're clearly not very scared of my dog. What they do instead is that they kind of bare their teeth and they kind of make almost like hissing noises towards my dog. So I've seen them do that as well. And then if they really need to, they'll run away. They can run up to about 4 miles per hour to get away from their predators. And I'm going to skip back to something. I told you that possums are omnivores, but I forgot to show you their skull. So if we look at their teeth, we can see that they have large canines for tearing into different things like other animals, right? Or if something is dead, they'll even eat already dead animals. So they'll use those canines for that. But if we look at the back, they have these molars. And those molars are going to help them to grind up that plant material, whether it's leaves or berries or nuts or seeds. So those back teeth are really going to help them chew their food. They use their good sense of smell to find their food. So they locate their food using their sense of smell. So they have a heightened sense of smell here in this long snout of theirs. And then they actually, since they're nocturnal, they have a structure in their eyes called a tapetum lucidum, which is why you may see their eyes glowing at night. That's a structure in their eyes. We do not have that structure, so we do not have eyes that glow at night. And consequently, we have poor night vision. We can't see very well whenever it's dark. That structure reflects light back and allows light to hit the retina a second time. And that's what helps them see at night. Another thing possums will do is they will climb trees. So if we look at their feet, this one is the front foot, and then we have the back foot. I think they kind of look like a hand to me. Here, I'll turn it around. Kind of look like hands to me. That's going to help them climb up in the trees. They can avoid predators that way if they wanted to. Maybe seek safety, sleep a little bit, never know. And one more structure they have to help them climb those trees and to stabilize themselves is this tail back here. This is what we call a prehensile tail. And possums will use this as a fifth limb. So they have 2 front hands, 2 back hands, and then they have their tail. And they'll use it to help them grab onto things and, like I said, stabilize themselves whenever they're climbing in trees. And you may have even heard that possums can hang upside down from their tails whenever they're in the trees. And It's partially true and partially false. Young possums or juvenile possums can definitely hang upside down from their tails whenever they're young. But as a possum gets larger, they become so heavy that their tails cannot handle the weight of the possum by itself. So they can't hang upside down from their tails whenever they're full-grown adults, but they can whenever they're young. So as I said, partially true, partially false. So with the possum, we covered physical adaptations, the good sense of smell, the eyesight, the hands being able to climb up in trees, the tail being a prehensile tail and using it as a fifth limb, and we covered behavioral adaptations. The ability to play dead or bare its teeth whenever it feels threatened. Those are behaviors, actions that the possum does. One thing I haven't mentioned about the possum is that they are a marsupial, which means that they give birth to live baby possums, but they're only about the size of a honeybee. So they're really, really small. And what happens is when they're born, they go immediately into a pouch on the mom's belly. And they'll stay in that pouch for about 3 months. After those 3 months, then they'll come and hang out on the back of the mom for another 2 weeks or so. And then after those 2 weeks, it will start to move around on its own. And for me personally, one of the cutest things about possums is the baby possums. Whenever they're small and the mom is still looking after them and they start to wander off, if they get lost from their mom, the baby possums start to make little sneezy noises, and the mom is able to locate the babies based on those sneezy noises. So they have a pretty good sense of hearing as well to be able to locate their young ones. Okay, I think I covered everything with a possum. Do we have questions before I move on?
We do have a couple about the possum. What are some of their predators? Cameron wants to know.
That's a very good question. I didn't cover that. Predators of the possum may be things like bobcats or coyotes, foxes, snakes maybe. Snakes are probably just threatened by them. I wouldn't say a snake would be a predator.
And one more, James wants to know, why would they be nocturnal?
So they are nocturnal because they feel safer coming out at night. If we think about it in a city environment, it's because people are mostly asleep and not moving around in the environment whenever they are. So they kind of have a little bit more free reign and less threats at night.
I think that's all I see for the possum for now. I saw some good frog ones come in that we'll get back to at the end. So again, if you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We do have time for one more animal.
Awesome. Okay, our last animal today will be a snake. And this is a Western Diamondback rattlesnake. So again, what do you observe about the snake? Where does it live? How does it protect itself? What does it eat? And how does it capture it if it's alive? Trying to turn it around so you can see all of the angles. one of the first things I noticed was the pattern of the scales. So we said frogs and toads were amphibians. Snakes are reptiles, so they have scales. Amphibians do not. Another thing I noticed, let me turn it all the way around, are these teeth. They look pretty scary to me. And of course, the rattle. We'll talk about all of those things. Let's start with the scales and the pattern of the skin. So I said this is a Western Diamondback rattlesnake, and it comes from these diamond shapes that are on the back of the snake. And this pattern is actually really good for camouflaging with their environment and blending in with the rocks and the terrain that's there, and even the shade in between the rocks. So they're going to camouflage really well with their environment and blend in. And that's one way they can protect themselves. It's also, they also have other ways to protect themselves as well. Another thing I want to talk about with the scales is the difference in them. And what I want to do is switch my view really quick. So this is a snake shed. Snakes shed their skin occasionally, and they do it from head to tail, all the way along their body. We humans, we shed our skin too, but not in this way. We don't shed all of our skin from head to toe all at the same time. We just do it little by little, but all the time. So snakes even shed their skin over their eyeballs. If you can see that right there, that's a scale over their eye. It helps protect it from things like dirt and sand and stuff like that. So they shed their skin. But if we look at the scales, we can see that the back scales are much smaller than the belly scales. The belly scales are actually a little bit longer. They're a different shape even. And that's because they need to be able, that's how they move. They use muscles within their body, and it's a wave-like motion that goes from head to tail. And what these scales do is they push off of the irregularities on the ground and propels them forward. So we can see the difference between the belly scales and the back scales. This brings me to questions about the rattle. Let's do the rattle. So as I said, snakes shed their skin from head to tail. But rattlesnakes don't actually shed the last little tip of their tail. It actually gets turned into the lobes that are here on the rattle. Now, the rattle itself is a physical adaptation, but the action that the rattle performs is a behavioral adaptation. So they shake their rattle, and they can shake it up to about 60 times per second. But why do you think they shake it? Do I have any guesses? Snakes shake their tail to alert other animals and humans to their presence. And it will rattle whenever they feel threatened. So kind of like the possum plays dead whenever it feels threatened, snakes, when they feel threatened, or rattlesnakes, when they feel threatened, will shake their rattle. And it's just a way, it almost like, I think about it, if I was on a trail hiking, this snake may camouflage really, really well, and I may not see it. But hopefully I'll hear it. So it's a way for them to say, excuse me, you may not see me, I camouflage really well, but I'm here and you're invading my bubble and I feel threatened. Please go away. So they're actually being pretty friendly with this rattle and giving us a warning that they are there even if we can't see them. Now, as a hiker or someone who's outside, my instinct may be to just run away, but we should actually pause, try to locate the rattle, and then go in the opposite direction of the rattling noise. The last thing you want to do is get scared and run into a rattlesnake. So always just pause, try to get a sense of where the sound is coming from, and then move away from it. Snakes they get a bad reputation, but they're not seeking humans to bite humans. They're actually just trying to protect themselves. We're a lot bigger than they are, so they feel that we are a threat to them. Now we can talk about its teeth. Do you think snakes are carnivores, herbivores, or omnivores? Snakes are carnivores. They eat things like little mice, little lizards. If there is a frog or something, they might eat that as well. And there's a couple of structures within their mouth that I want to talk about. So this is the skull of a non-venomous snake. And we can see that it has a lot of teeth, but they're all this like curved shape. And then if we look at the Western Diamondback snake, which is a venomous snake, we see fangs at the front. Now this skull, it's a little misleading because snakes do not have 6 fangs at the front of their mouth. They only have 2 that are visible. But when those fangs fall out, which they do from time to time, they'll be able to grow in replacements. And that's what these other 2 are, like replacements for those 2 fangs. But if we look at their teeth, they have a few more back there, but they're also curved. And these curved teeth are actually really beneficial for snakes. Do you have any guesses why? Snakes swallow their prey whole, and they don't exactly have hands to hold that animal in its mouth. So what happens is if that animal is still alive and tries to scurry out of the mouth or wiggle out of the mouth of the snake, what will happen is that it will get caught on those curved teeth. So if this is the animal and these are the teeth and it's trying to get out, what will happen is it will get pierced by those teeth again and it won't be able to get away. So those curved teeth are that kind of help the animal stay in the snake's mouth. Another thing you can't really tell is that they actually have really loose jaw attachments back here, and that's going to help them be able to open their mouths really wide and swallow their prey whole. Now, some of the questions I get about snakes are about their bones and one, if they have them. And so I want to bring out a skeleton here. We've already looked at the skull, so I can't trick you and ask you if they have bones. So they do. And those bones will go all the way from the skull to the tip of the tail. Now, humans, we have bones, right? We have a skull, we have arm bones and leg bones. We also have ribs that help protect our heart and our lungs. And these bones that you see coming down the side of the snake's body are all equivalent, very similar to the ribs that we have protecting our lungs and our heart. And it's going to protect the internal organs of the snake. There's one more thing I want to cover about snakes and venom and poison. They're a little different. So I know I mentioned that the toad can be poisonous and the snake can be venomous. And they're both chemicals that can be toxic or harmful to humans, but the difference is how they get into our bodies and how it causes that harm. So for things like the toad, we're going to absorb that through our skin by touching it, or poison dart frogs, or even poison ivy. We're going to touch it and it's going to be absorbed through our skin. Snakes, they're going to bite and they're going to inject that venom into our bodies. So poison is something that is absorbed. Venom is something that is injected. Now, poison can also be something that you ingest or eat, kind of like Snow White. Whenever she eats the poison apple from the evil queen, she gets cursed, and that's whenever she falls asleep. So poison is something you ingest, eat, or absorb through your skin, and venom is injected into your body. I think I covered everything.
Yes, but if you want to leave our snake and our frog out, we have a couple questions for each one of them to wrap up for today.
Okay.
With the snake, Jocelyn had asked, why are snakes' bones so flexible? You kind of just talked about their bones. I don't know if you have anything to add on that one.
I don't know if they're necessarily flexible. So the joint in their jaw is really flexible so that they can swallow that prey really whole, swallow the prey whole. And those bones will flex a little bit whenever that prey is going through their bodies. But I don't know why. It just helps them to maneuver around.
Okay, and Xavion wants to know, will something happen to a rattlesnake if its rattle tail falls off?
I don't think it'll die or anything like that, if that's what you were asking. I think it'll just grow back eventually. So these lobes, again, they come from the shed skin, and sometimes they do fall off of the tip. So they're constantly falling off and replacing themselves. So I think it'll just take some time, but it'll replace itself.
And last one for our snake, Trinity wants to know, why is the tail a different color than the rest of the body?
I have tried to find an answer to this a couple of times now, and I'm going to have to do a little bit more researching to look it up. I couldn't find a good reason of why. I did look that several snakes do have different colors whenever it comes to the base of their tail, and I know that scientists can use them for identification purposes, but I don't know why it's different. I don't know what purpose that would serve the snake, if it serves anything. So that's a question that I don't know yet, but that I'm still trying to find the answer to.
Okay, and we have just a couple back on our frog. Nyla wants to know, what is that line down his back?
I don't know why this toad has a line down its back. I don't know if it happened during taxidermy or if it's part of a body structure. And it could just be for camouflaging, maybe trying to break up their body. It may look like a twig or something to another animal, but that's something I'll have to look up.
And then our last one here, James wants to know if there are any bones that frogs have that we don't have.
I'm sure there are some that we don't have and they do have, but I'm not sure of the names of them. We can see that their hip bone comes out a little bit farther, so ours would not come out that far. They also have structures, those webbed feet. The bones are really long, and I don't know if they have extra there. They have less ribs than we do. And one of my favorite things whenever I was talking about the eyes being able to swallow, if you look at their skull, they don't have anything holding their eyes in place underneath their eyes. So that's how they are able to move their eyes and push their eyes into their mouths and use them to swallow. And the same thing with toads. You don't see any structure underneath their eyeballs.
Okay, well, I know I definitely learned a lot today about my favorite, the owl, and about some of these others who might be favorites of mine now too. And I've loved getting to hear everyone's questions. They've been so good. And I'm sure that a lot of you guys watching have other awesome questions. So definitely encourage you to look up some of those answers and keep learning. Kristen, thank you so much for sharing with us.
Of course, anytime. Bye.
Bye, everybody.